This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by the fine gentlemen of Bird Campbell. Bird Campbell, PA, law firm founded by two former Dukies. If you have legal business in the states of Texas or Florida, we urge you to look them up at birdcampbell.com. Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to DBR Podcast, Duke Basketball Report Podcast number 133. Now, actually, if you're counting, this is 134, but we made a mistake last time because one-third of us were drunk, and the one-third of us that were drunk said last...
Two-thirds.
Two-thirds.
Two-thirds, all right?
Two-thirds were drunk.
Two-thirds.
So the two-thirds who were drunk said... Last time they said it was 134, even though it was 133. So now this one is now 133, even though it's 134. It doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't matter because we're here to talk about Duke basketball. You don't care how many times we've done it in the past. You're here for the present. You're here for the now, and the now is very, very good for the Duke Blue Devils. Before we get to talking about what's happened in the past couple of days with Duke basketball and a little bit of football as well, let me bring in my partners in crime, the other two-thirds of the team. Are y'all sober tonight? Donald Wine in Washington, D.C., back from Durham, I understand, right, Donald?
Yeah, we're recording this late on Sunday, November 11th, because I was driving back from Durham. I got to spend the weekend with one-third of this podcast. Sam was gracious enough to host me on his couch, him and his roommate, Jordan. Section 5, Fuqua showed me a great time, and we saw a couple of Duke wins, big Duke wins, in Cameron and in Wallace Wade. So it was a good weekend, Sam. Thanks for letting me crash, and it was a fun weekend. We'll do it again.
Yeah, Sam Klein, you are still in Durham after having Donald visit you. Did the weekend live up to all your expectations?
Yeah, thank you, Donald, for the shout out to Section 5. What's up, my people? We had an excellent time. Donald showed up here on Friday. We went to the game on Saturday. My parents were also here for the game on Saturday, which was a lot of fun. And then Donald and I and many of my classmates went and celebrated the football victory in Chapel Hill on Saturday night. So that was a good time. And then we were kind of sleepy, but still present for the game today in Durham, the basketball game today, Cameron Indoor, the home opener for the Blue Devils. So we were there for that and doing live commentary. I've never sat with Donald at a basketball game before, so that was kind of exciting because I thought, Donald, you can correct me if you felt differently. I thought we were having like a little sort of mini contest between us to see which of us remembered more of the cheers.
Yeah, I will say this: tomorrow, my legs are going to be filing for a restraining order against the rest of my body because they are tired from doing all that jumping. My voice is starting to crack a little bit from all the yelling that Sam and I did, but I think Sam and I represented for the podcast and making sure that everybody was in tune and in mid-season form.
I love it. You know what I realized, guys? I forgot to say who I am. Like the people out there don't know. Anyway, I am Jason Evans. I am steering the ship this week. I am the man in charge, and we will begin the fun by talking about the basketball game that happened just a few hours ago. The Duke Blue Devils played the Army Knights. Duke won 94-72, and it's sort of weird, like that final margin of 22 points. I should point out, by the way, Duke was a 40-point favorite in this game, so we did not cover the spread. The final margin of 22 points both doesn't indicate how close the game was, and also I don't know. It's sort of it was a really weird game for Duke because there was a time early in the second half when Army had cut it to 2 points. I think. I mean, this was a truly competitive game, but at the same time, guys, y'all were there. It never really felt like Duke was in danger of losing, did it? Donald, you lead it off for me. Tell me your impressions from this game, and let's see how long you can go before you mention the name Zion Williamson.
Well. First of all hats off to Army for how they played because I don't think it was, I don't think the game was ever in doubt, but Army sure did put on a great performance today. And on Veterans Day, it's almost kind of fitting that they represented their institution the way they did, because I thought they played tremendously well. I'm looking at the stats, and for them, they shot 46, almost 47% from 3-point in the first half, and that seems low because it seemed like everything they were taking were open jumpers. They were passing the ball very well, and everything seemed to be going in at one point. So I really admire the effort that they put forward. I think it just kind of ran out of gas in the second half. Now, before I mention number one in your hearts, number one in the scorebook, I am going to quote Stephen A. Smith in discussing what I think of Zion Williamson's performance today. My God, this man is a beast. And to see him in person be beast-like, I'm going to give it to Sam in a second because he was standing right next to me, but there were literally maybe five or six times during the game, really the first half, when he had 21 points in the first half. We both looked at each other and we're just like, what? This dude's amazing. This dude's unreal. A lot of just accolades for this dude, because what he has done so far in a Duke uniform has just been nothing short of incredible. And to see it live, everything is Jason, when we were talking earlier, you used the word emphatic. That is exactly what he does. Everything he does is like, if it's a block, is like that person owes him money. If it's a dunk, it's like the rim stole something from him. Like, he does everything with power, but he still has that flow and that grace to really be nimble, be quick. He hustles. His motor is unlike any player I have seen live. And I'm counting NBA, high school, college. His motor is one of the greatest I have seen ever live.
Yeah. Wait. Hey, so
go ahead.
So I was going to say, and Sam, I'll get it over to you. Donald, I'm so glad you mentioned and talked about that. On a day when Duke was struggling with intensity a little bit. I mean, look, after Kentucky, we playing Army just isn't the same thing. I think the team was struggling with intensity, struggling with focus perhaps a little bit. Zion Williamson was on the floor constantly. There was no such thing as a loose ball that he wasn't going to go after. Like, he didn't care who he was playing. He was going to put in maximum effort. What an admirable thing. Sam, what was it like to watch it from your perspective?
Mesmerizing, incredible, astounding. There was a point in the second half when Zion collected his sixth block, and Donald and I were saying to each other, we were like, he could get a triple-double with blocks today. It didn't end up happening. He ended up getting stuck on 6, but what an incredible performance to watch. And one of the things I noticed today that I guess I hadn't really seen before is that it's not like Zion, we knew this, it's not like Zion is the tallest guy on the team, but my God, when he gets up in the air, it's like he just hangs there forever. And the way that he's able to just engulf a shot by the other team is astounding and quite frankly scary. The stuff I wanted to touch on was actually more on the other players, and I actually wanted to sort of pivot and be the Debbie Downer here. The offense today really didn't have any of the same flow that it had against Kentucky. Guys were not able to get to the rim. I thought a huge issue was the number of outside jumpers, and not even 3-pointers, like long twos that in particular Cam Reddish and RJ Barrett seemed to want to take today. I didn't really understand what the offensive game plan was against Army. It didn't seem like the team quite had. Now, I say that they ended up scoring 94 points, but there were periods where it felt like they were settling for jumpers that they didn't want to settle for.
Settle for jumpers was the story of the game. Do you know, I don't know if you've looked at the stats, half of our shots, 36 of our 72 shots were 3-pointers. And you're right, we took a lot of long twos as well. It's like we didn't want to go to the basket at all.
It was very weird, especially remembering how against the front line of Kentucky that we talked about here was so big that Duke was able to get in the lane and make things happen against them. And they couldn't do that somehow against Army. Now, Army wasn't a small team. They had a number of pretty big players who were able to stand in the way, but that shouldn't be enough to deter guys like RJ Barrett and Zion Williamson from getting to the hole. The other problem today really was on the defensive end. And even though Duke gave up a lot of points against Kentucky, it still felt like there wasn't a defensive game plan. Today, it felt like they were lightly defending the perimeter and letting, in particular, Army's guards get to the rack much easier than I would have expected. Army players were getting to the hole.
Hey, it was Tommy
getting
Funk.
off layups. Yeah.
I was going to say, it was Tommy Funk. It was the Tommy Funk show. That kid had 10 assists, and his ability to get in the lane, draw the defense, and drop it off to other guys for layups was really impressive.
Layups and 3-pointers. I mean, a lot of I was commenting to Sam during the game that during their warm-ups, they were practicing a play where they dribble down into the paint, pass it out to an open guy on the corner or the wing who shoots the three. They worked on it for like 20 minutes during their warm-up, with their initial warm-up. And that is where they got a lot of their points. It was just wide open 3-pointers in the corner and in the wing. And Funk was finding those guys. And even, driving into the lane from the front, he was still able to kick out to the corner for a guy that just happened to be open. And that was kind of something that, I noticed during the game is like they practiced that. And, just like Army, they practiced to perfection, and they were executing that play perfectly each time.
The other thing that I noticed today was how often Coach K was going to the bench and rotating players around. I think we saw most of the scholarship players, minus Joey Baker, in the first half. So guys were getting in early, and they were making a lot of substitutions. So there might have been a learning aspect to this game. I haven't had time to go look at the post-game commentary, but Donald and I agreed at halftime. We were like, man, Coach K is probably going to be angry at the fact that this team that is so talented is only up whatever it was, like 6 or 8 points at halftime.
50-42, yeah, 8 points.
It did not, despite scoring 50 points and technically being on track to get to 100, did not look like they were totally engaged. So what I was getting at then was that this might have been an experiment game for Coach K and for the coaching staff to kind of figure out which lineups work well together, because we saw so many substitutions, and we saw not even necessarily guys coming in for other guys of their equivalent size. We saw a lot of mixing and matching of the lineups, of Zion Williamson having to play the 5 and RJ Barrett having to play the 4, not always having sort of a traditional big man on the floor. So that part of it was interesting to me. I didn't come away with it thinking that there was a particular lineup combination that was like, oh, that actually works all together. Like those different guys who you don't necessarily think of as being complementary complement each other well. But I guess I appreciate in that regard that Coach K is trying to find the optimal way to deploy this lineup, because despite how good they looked against Kentucky and scoring all those points and just being so mesmerizing, it's not like Duke has this very efficient like execution that we know this is how they're going to attack teams and it's always going to work. It seemed like it was a lot of individual play, and you don't want to rely on individual shot creation primarily as the form of offense, because if you shut a guy down or if a guy gets hurt, then everything changes. So I think he's still trying to figure out how does the offense flow with this team who, it's cool that so many different guys can bring the ball up, but then how do they initiate the offense if, say, Cam Reddish gets a long rebound but doesn't get on the fast break, or Zion Williamson gets the ball but he doesn't get on the fast break, but he still then has the ball at the top of the key. I think they're still trying to figure all those things out and get better, because they still are a young team and they still have a lot of room to grow, even though they look very good right now.
Well, Sam, just a second ago, you were talking about the rotations, and I wanted to very briefly mention to me a really surprising development that frankly we've seen in both of the first 2 games now, and I think that it's probably going to be true over the course of the season. And I'm going to harken back to when we were doing our predictions of the minutes, how many minutes specifically Jack White was going to play, and Sam, you had the highest number. You 401, I believe, was the number. It is entirely possible that you will win that prediction contest by the time we reach Thanksgiving. Jack White in this game played as many minutes as Marquise Bolden and Javon DeLaurier combined. White played 25, DeLaurier and Bolden combined for 25. That was, by the way, also more than Alex O'Connell. Alex O'Connell played 10 minutes. It is becoming abundantly clear, at least to me. And maybe part of the problem is, Army is not a team that has a lot of big guys. You're right; they weren't tiny, but they're not a team that is playing a traditional post kind of offense and post kind of player. So it's possible that K went, I don't need Bolden and Delorier as much as I will against North Carolina, for example, who are have tons of big men. But I think it's entirely possible that we're going to find out that Coach K's preferred lineup when the game is on the line late in the game. I think Coach K's lineup is going to be Barrett, Reddish, Williamson, Trey Jones, and Jack White, not Marquise Bolden, not Javin Delorier, not Alex O'Connell. I think Jack White, if you want to call him the sixth man, you can, but I essentially think Jack White's going to get the fifth most minutes of anybody on this team. And before we move away from this Army game and start talking a little bit more about Kentucky and the fallout from that, Donald, let me ask you, were you concerned by RJ Barrett's regression? May be the only word to say. As great as RJ was against Kentucky, I didn't love his shot selection. You guys mentioned, talk to me a little bit what you saw from RJ today. There was a lot of hero ball, and it's concerning.
I didn't consider it hero ball, but it definitely was frustrating, and I think he was frustrated. Just on the day, it seemed like everything that was going in for him, or all the the lanes that were open for him against Kentucky were very much closed up against Army, and Army did a great job at containing him and making him get outside of his comfort zone. It's something that he's going to have to learn this year in college. But one thing that I was looking at today, he had 5 turnovers, and the turnovers that he had was like a hitch in his stutter step, or in his first step when he grabbed the ball. They were all there was one that was a carry, that it was called, and the other 4 were traveling calls. And the reason for that is that he kind of was trying to take a crow hop before he would start on his drive to the lane. And I don't know if you noticed this, Jason, but TV Teddy Valentine was one of those refs out there today, and he made a meal out of calling those travel calls very quickly before the drive could even start. I feel like that frustrated him, and he tried to kind of compensate by taking some shots that were unnecessary. But I think I don't think it's anything to be concerned about overly, because I think it's just one of those games where he's going to learn, hey, there's going to be times where I get frustrated and I need to just settle down and play my game. I think he did that a little bit more in the second half. But I think also one thing that really feeds him is Zion Williamson. I think those two have a great rapport. You can see it in the pregame. You can see it during the game. When one is down, the other is picking him up. So I think that is going to be something that's going to be very important this year. Those two guys playing together, I think, is when RJ Barrett is at his best, because Zion can help him be at the level that he needs to be.
All right, gentlemen. So I think we have to go back in time a little bit. We have to talk. We did a special podcast about the Kentucky game, but we need to talk a little bit about some of the fallout, so to speak, from that game. And I want to start the discussion with this. I am as impressive as Duke was in that game. I have spent the past 48, 72 hours or so. Every time I bump into someone, because everyone and their brother knows that I'm the world's biggest Duke fan, or one of the 3 biggest Duke fans, I should say. Friends that I run into, people who I didn't even know necessarily paid attention to college basketball. I actually had one of my wife's friends this evening said to me, "Hey, how about Duke?" People are coming up out of nowhere and want to talk to me about how great Duke is at basketball. And to every one of those people, my message has been the same. And I want to be clear that I was saying this before the Army game was closer than people thought it was going to be. I've been like, can we slow our roll? Can we just calm the hype train a little tiny bit? Because in the wake of the Kentucky game, ESPN was doing segments on SportsCenter and First Take and all those other stupid shows, and running articles about what the line would be if Duke played an NBA team. Like, we've played one, now two. We've played one game, and people are talking about, hey, how would these guys do against the NBA? It's insanity. It's crazy. People have gone just bonkers because of this one Kentucky game. I'm not going to toss it to either of you. Do you agree with me that it's gone insane and that we need to slow our roll? We need to calm down a little bit. How about we see how we do in Maui before we decide that this team is going to play against an NBA team? It's crazy, isn't it?
I mean, look, you have to take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt. I don't get when they were. The next day they were talking a lot about, the game and the fallout and like how good can Duke be. The words undefeated were thrown out. Like, I'm not getting hype up over that because
this team is definitely going to lose games.
Yeah,
Here's the thing. I'm
trying to win a national championship, and if it takes a couple losses to do that, then I will exchange those losses for a nice sixth title banner to hang in Cameron at the end of the season. I think we're all in agreement there, right?
150%. Absolutely. In fact, I will say that I think with freshmen, with guys this young, who clearly, and look, they showed it today against Army. Clearly, they have to learn things about success as well as failure. I think they will need to lose a game, probably more than one, to begin to understand the effort and the communication and all those other things that Coach K preaches constantly that it takes to win a national title. Do y'all want to know something insane? You want to know something truly crazy? If you walked into a Las Vegas sports book right now I'm not in Vegas, but I've looked it up online. If you walked in right now today and you said, I want to bet on Duke to win the national title, put it another way, you're going to walk in, you're going to say, I want to bet on Duke to win 6 consecutive games against some of the best teams in the country come the end of the season. If you were to bet on Duke to win the national title right now, you would get 2-1 odds. That's stupid. 2-1. If we were currently in the Final Four, 2-1 odds would be a little bit crazy if you ask me.
You might as well just take us off the board for a 2-1.
That's just a dumb number. 2-1. A week ago, Duke was the number 1 pick in Vegas. We were still, before the Kentucky game, we were number 1. Us and Kentucky were both tied as the top pick. We were 5-1. I thought 5-1 was kind of crazy, but I guess I can see 5-1. But Duke is 2-1 right now. This is bonkers. This is not sanity.
But here's the thing. This was, for the rest of America, the first time that they got to see this team play. No one saw us play in Canada. No one saw our exhibition games. For Duke, for everyone outside of the Duke bubble, it was their first chance to see Duke, and it's a very major game. Duke versus Kentucky is a national game, right? But also, it's the first time for a lot of these people that they have to open their mouths to say, oh my God, Duke is a great team and they're fun to watch. And look what they did to a team that is perennially one of the top programs in the country. They beat the number 2 team by 34 points, all these accolades, right? So that's why they're going wild. But you know who's not going wild? For the most part, very few people inside the Duke bubble are going wild. And so that's why I don't think it's anything to really take stock in, because it's people who are opening a present expecting to find a Matchbox car and they get a Porsche. And what do they want to do? They want to drive the shit out of it. And that's what they're doing right now. Meanwhile, we're like, yo, we're just going to keep this baby into the garage until it's time to let it loose, right? Like, that's where we're at. And that's kind of what you saw this week. You weren't seeing Duke people talk to you about undefeated or, that we could beat the Warriors. It was people who were outside that bubble. And I think that's why it's not going to be something that hopefully will linger, because I think, it's going to be something that's going to be reined in as the season goes on.
Donald, I will say this. We will conclude this conversation with, I want to tip my hat to you. That Matchbox car to Porsche analogy, that is one of the best commentaries we've ever had on this podcast. Congratulations, sir.
It just goes to show you the quality of the discussion here on the DBR Podcast.
This edition of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by Dominate Test Prep. Speaking of Duke dominating, if you want to dominate the GMAT or the GRE, you should go to dominatetestprep.com. Dominate Test Prep was founded by a Duke alum, a gentleman named Brett Etheridge, and dominatetestprep.com teaches you Brett's proven test-taking strategies that produce high scores on test day. If you're thinking at all about taking the GMAT or the GRE, check them out and make sure you use the coupon code GODEVILS. That's GODEVILS, and you'll save 10% off your course package. That's dominatetestprep.com, founded by Duke's Brett Etheridge. Brett, thanks for being a sponsor of the DBR Podcast. Gentlemen, we're going to take a little break from the basketball talk. We'll get back to it in a moment, but we also have to talk about some football because this weekend, Duke played our hated rivals, the North Carolina Tar Heels, those cheating bastards. I will never forgive them for their decades of cheating. Duke won the game 42-35. It was a really weird game because in the first half, no one could stop anyone. And in the second half, it was like, it was all the defenses. It was kind of crazy in that way. But the Blue Devils end up winning the game again. 42-35 was the score. Gentlemen, I know y'all were at the game, and the story of this game was Daniel Jones. Please, Sam, tell me a little bit about how impressed you were with Daniel Jones.
Honestly, I think it's less Daniel Jones and more that the offensive line finally was able to give him space to operate, because prior to this week, really, we had talked consistently about how Jones wasn't getting the protection he needed to do what we knew he was capable of. I think that you can read those silly NFL draft reports and from, whatever it was a month or so ago when they were thinking, oh, is Daniel Jones like a first round pick or a second round pick, which I don't know, maybe he is. I don't know enough about how they scout these prospects, but then that kind of fell off because Duke lost a few games. He didn't look so great. Then all of a sudden this week, it's like, is Daniel Jones back? Well, I don't know. He has it doesn't seem to me like he's changed so much, but he had opportunities the other day and he capitalized. The most impressive thing to me was the running. We saw him last year pull off some nice runs. The other day, I don't know if they were designed or if he was just taking what the defense was giving to him, but he busted out a couple of really long runs where he was running straight down the field and no one was stopping him. And he was able to read the defense and get out in space. And unfortunately, there was the one where he landed. It looked like he landed in the end zone, but came up just short. Really impressive running day.
On the replay, you could see his knee went down and the ball was like at the half-yard line.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think most of those runs were kind of option plays where he can either give it to the running back or he can pull it back and run it himself. So it's sort of, that kind of a play. But continue.
So on the passing, I thought that the passing game for Duke was sort of hit or miss. Like you said, Jason, in the first half, it was like Duke was hitting everything. And then in the second half, they couldn't hit anything anymore. So
that's because we were dropping passes.
Right. So that was the challenge, was that a number of the wide receivers were having sort of weird days. Like they would make the catches and then they wouldn't. I don't think we've seen a Duke wide receiver core be this inconsistent, where clearly there are a number of guys out there, 3 or 4 of them, who are very fast and get out in space, but then the ball comes to them and they don't know how to catch it. And that's a challenge. It's hard for Daniel Jones also to show that he's elite when he has wide receivers dropping passes that he's tossing into their laps like that.
Oh, not just their laps. I mean, the pass that Taylor dropped, that was like a 30 or 40 yard bomb. I mean, an incredible throw.
The one that landed on his shoulder pad.
Or no, it landed off his face mask.
Or hit him in the head, yeah. I know that it bounced off of him pretty hard.
That was insane. Although I think the NFL guys, supposedly, the word is there were like a half dozen or more NFL scouts who were in attendance at this game to watch Daniel Jones.
Hold on. Why were there multiple NFL scouts at a Duke UNC football game?
To watch Daniel Jones.
Okay.
No, seriously. I mean, believe me, I'm not saying Green Bay or New England, teams with great quarterbacks aren't looking at Daniel Jones, but there are plenty of teams that are trying to find their quarterback of the future, and Daniel Jones is high up on their list of guys to at least evaluate.
Well, if they didn't get a chance yet, Duke is playing Clemson this weekend, and they just announced today that the game is on ESPN in prime time. So hopefully there will be even more scouts in attendance for that. I'm shocked, frankly, that Duke got a prime time spot against a quality opponent. You would think a game like this would definitely be slotted for noon, and Clemson would come in maybe sleepy. It being in prime time, I do not think bodes well for the Blue Devils, as Clemson's trying to secure their spot in the college football playoff.
Yeah, well, so wait, before we go to, I want to get Donald's impression of this game and another thing as well. But before we go, I just really quick, I want to give you all, I heard an incredible stat. This is one of the great stats of all time, in my opinion. Carolina scored on 4 of their first 6 possessions. Really impressive. On their next 7 possessions after that, they gained a total of 23 yards. So, I mean, our much maligned defense that is banged up doesn't even cover it. Really, really stepped up against Carolina for long stretches of this game, and was so impressive. And then before I go to Donald, did you guys see Coach Cut dancing to James Brown?
Oh my goodness. Donald, talk about that.
Awesome. Donald, tell me about Coach Cut. Get up off of that thing, James Brown.
I'm a big Motown fan. I'm a big soul fan. I'm a big James Brown fan. I am giving Coach Cut a 10 out of 10 for that performance. It was terrific. And here's the thing. It seemed very impromptu and was like, oh, we're just going to play James Brown and you're not going to invite me. Like that was his reaction. And it was terrific. That was a great moment. It just shows that Coach Cut can never leave. Like it's etched in stone. I hope it's in his contract. He just can't leave because those sort of things need to stay in our lives for our enjoyment.
I'll take the questionable clinging to assistant coaches who have had the game pass them by to occasionally have the clips of Coach Cutcliffe dancing to Motown.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right, so Donald, your turn to talk a little bit of football, and you can either tell me about what you liked about the UNC game, or I know you are a Miami person. You're a Miami fan. If you want to hearken back a little bit to the game that made us bowl eligible, and to some extent, probably the biggest win of the biggest game of the season, although that Northwestern win looks really good as time goes by. But talk to me a little bit about both Carolina and Miami.
So for North Carolina first. I will also talk about the fact that Daniel Jones, and I'm quoting my friend here who's a UNC fan. He texted me and said somehow Daniel Jones turned into Michael Vick, and that's because on Saturday he played like Michael Vick. I think for the first half it was a straight up video game that we were watching unfold in real life because both teams were scoring on every possession. No one could offer any defense. For us, it was frustrating in the sense that, North Carolina was great at running around the edge. We've talked about this all year. With our injuries, we just are down to like 5th and 6th string guys who are, just don't have the legs to cover that sort of ground. And teams are exploiting that. And I really think that UNC did a good job of doing that. On the other hand, I think we did a good job of doing the same thing right back at them. The holes that they had up the middle were exploited by Daniel Jones, by Deion Jackson. Throwing the ball. Look, we could have probably had 80 points with, some of these passes that were dropped. So I thought that, our wide receivers, as Sam said, had kind of an erratic day. They'd make a great catch, and then like the next long bomb, they would drop it or bounce off someone's face mask or something like that. But I think with that, it was very interesting to see the war of attrition. Who was going to blink first with this game? And I think it was North Carolina. And here's the thing. We had a string of possessions where we had a blocked field goal, a fumble, all deep in North Carolina territory. And we still persevered through that. and the defense really clamped down and really made made North Carolina have to be on their heels the rest of the game. No pun intended. But I think,
man. So the final score was 42-35, and we had to sweat the final play. Duke should have been winning this game by 20 plus points.
Right.
I mean, you are so right. The woes of our kicking game, not good. And yeah, we made several key turnovers. But all right, so I think you're about to turn to Miami. Give me some Miami.
Yeah. So the one thing that I was talking about last week, or when we previewed the Miami game, was that we had to get into the heads of the Miami quarterbacks and make it so that they had a long day. And I will give you the passing totals for Miami. It was 13 for 28 for 111 yards. Now, that was two quarterbacks. That wasn't one. If that was one quarterback, you'd say that was a terrible game. But that was for both quarterbacks that played, N'Kosi Perry and Malik Rozier. And I think that is what allowed Duke to really pull off a victory in what was a terrible game as far as the elements. I mean, it seemed like 45 inches of rain fell during that game. They were playing in a moat, and it really affected the passing game. I know, Daniel Jones, I thought, had a pretty good game in the air considering the elements. He had the one interception, but he was 17 for 35 for 130 yards. I thought that was pretty good. Deion Jackson had a ridiculous game, and he was, the first play from scrimmage, 75-yard touchdown, and from there he was, it was, even though it was a slugfest back and forth as far as, getting through the water that was Hard Rock Stadium, I thought Deion Jackson did a great job at making a lot of big gains for average, helping keep the football in Duke's hands and really taking the momentum out of the hands of Miami. And I think that is why we pulled off a game which a lot of people didn't think we were going to win. Miami has been struggling, but that was the game that they thought they were going to win for them to become bowl eligible. And Duke really persevered. And like we've talked about before, the number of injuries that we've had on defense, and for them to squeak out a win and only allow 12 points in the process, that is a tremendous win for this team. And I think that is why we're bowl eligible.
Yeah, it's been a very, very successful season thus far. You kind of feel like everything coming up, after this is sort of gravy, and the gravy begins with the Clemson game. We won't get into a full preview of the Clemson game right now. We're going to have
in case you didn't know, Clemson is very good.
They're okay.
Yeah, you think so?
They're quite impressive. The line, I think spread is something like Clemson by 27. And I'm not going to tell you not to take Clemson there, but man, they're awesome.
This edition of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is also sponsored by Bird Campbell, PA. Bird Campbell, the law firm founded by two former Dukies. They are based out of Florida and Texas. If you have legal needs in those places, we urge you to reach out to them at byrdcampbell.com, birdcampbell.com. Or if you don't have legal needs, you can reach out to them and just tell them that you agree with them. Go to hell, Carolina, go to hell. Guys, we're going to get back to basketball again, and we're going to get back to recruiting because on Friday, Duke added the newest Blue Devil to the mix, another member of the class of 2019 high school who will be joining the Duke Blue Devils. That is none other than Boogie Ellis. Now, if there's nothing else about Boogie Ellis, we'd be able to say that he has one of the coolest names of anyone ever to attend Duke basketball. Boogie. I love that name. But Boogie Ellis will be coming to Duke. And guys, before I get to you all, I am traditionally the guy who talks about the recruits. So I'm going to give you a little bit of stuff on Boogie Ellis and then let y'all talk about it a little bit more. But this dude is flat out gets buckets. He is a combo guard. He's someone who could play point guard if we need him to, but if we don't, he will fill it up on the wing. He shot, get this, 46% on his three-pointers in the EYBL, in the Elite AAU games over the spring and summer. 46%. And just so you don't think, oh, he only took like 8 or 10 shots. That's how he took 144 threes this summer and hit 46% of them. You want another sign of what a good shooter is? In EYBL play, in AAU play, he averaged 87% on his free throws. There was one game this summer where he dropped 43 points. This dude is a stud scorer. And here's something you love to hear about a recruit. This is a guy who has worked hard at his game, and he has rocketed up the rankings. A year ago at this time, Boogie Ellis wasn't even a top 150 recruit. Duke wasn't even, this kid, to say he wasn't on our radar, that doesn't even do it justice. This is someone that Coach K probably hadn't even heard of, but he had a great spring, a great summer, and his junior year of basketball just, he blew up. He's now considered top 30 or so. He may end up being a McDonald's All-American, but Duke is thrilled to be getting Boogie Ellis as part of the program. Donald, I'll go to you first. Any feelings about how the class of 2019, high school class of 2019, is shaping up for the Blue Devils?
It sounds like it's shaping up pretty well. We, like you said, we have Wendell Moore, we have Boogie Ellis now. I think we're still going after Vernon Carey, and still have a chance at that and a couple other guys. But I think it's shaping out because here's the thing: we talk about the 2018 class and how great it is, and people, some people calling it the greatest class ever assembled. And, when you look at, a guy that's in the top 20 and a guy in the top 30, and people are like, oh, this is kind of a letdown. But I really don't think it is. I think for this year's class, it seems like Coach K is going after guys of need. And a guy that can score. We're going to need scorers. We're going to need a big man, and we're going to need a wing. So I think what he's going after is not necessarily, the top guys in the class. I know a couple have removed our names from contention, but I think in the end he's going after guys that he thinks is going to be a good fit for this basketball team in the future, and I think that's good. And I think with Boogie, like you said, he can score, like flat out score, and I think one of those, a score like that is something that is going to be always needed in college basketball. So big up to Boogie. Can't wait to see him in a Duke uniform.
Jason, the description you just gave me about Boogie Ellis makes him sound maybe like a Nolan Smith type player, like not the biggest guy, but knows how to move with the ball and knows how to score. Does that sound like maybe a good comparable?
That is excellent. And there are a lot of people who are saying the exact same thing about him. There are a lot of people who are saying he reminds them of Nolan Smith a little bit. He's not a guy who's physically huge. He's only 6'2". Nolan Smith wasn't, all that, dominating a guy in terms of his physical size. And somewhat like Nolan, there are a lot of folks who think Boogie Ellis is someone who will grow into his role at Duke. Not to say he won't play as a freshman, but that he won't be someone who will be dominant right out of the box as a freshman, but that, he'll be here for a few years, and that, sophomore, junior, maybe senior year, he will be a real stud and a really good player for us.
That's the kind of guy I'd like to get excited about, because I'm going to be curious next year. Duke may not have as many of these one and done, big time All-American type guys the way they have this year, but they're going to have experienced older players, guys like Jack White, Javin DeLaurier, Marquise Bolden are likely all going to be on the team next year. And so there's going to be like a good anchor for leadership. Alex O'Connell will be a junior. So there will be a lot of older talent in place. So it'll be curious to see how they bring up younger guys next year. I think this year is going to be sort of fluky in terms of, we have captains in Javin DeLaurier and Jack White, but neither of those guys figures to be a starter. Maybe they get spot starts here and there, but aren't going to play as prominent of a role as they should next year. I'm excited also that Duke's got guys that are in that slightly lower than fully elite tier, because they'll stick around and we'll get to see them develop a little more the way that we're seeing guys like O'Connell and DeLaurier and Marquise Bolden, although he was a little bit higher rated. So I'm excited on that front, but really looking forward to see also if Duke can land a Vernon Carey or someone else of that ilk to round out this class.
Well, and the other thing to be excited about is, the crazies are going to have fun yelling Boogie. Okay, folks, we have a Duke basketball game coming up in the next few days. The Blue Devils will be playing Eastern Michigan, the Eastern Michigan Eagles. And Eastern Michigan is already 3-0 on the season, although 2 of their games were against NAIA schools. I'm not even sure those games necessarily count, but they did play Drexel, and they beat Drexel. Some dude named Paul Jackson had 20 points, and Boubacar Touré had a double-double, 14 points, 11 rebounds to lead Eastern Michigan against Drexel. I would be remiss if I even began to try to preview the Eastern Michigan game, because we are graced on this podcast with none other than Donald Wine, and Donald is a Eastern Michigan fan. He grew up like only feet away from the campus or something like that. Donald, why don't you tell us all about Eastern Michigan?
I was born on November 30th, 1982. Yes, I have a birthday coming up. And I was born at St. Joseph's Mercy Hospital in Ypsilanti, Michigan, literally across the street from Eastern Michigan University, from their football stadium and what didn't exist at the time but now exists, the Convocation Center, where Eastern Michigan Eagles play basketball. And so it is a big part of my life. I've always have a soft spot for the Eagles. They were the Hurons back in the day, changed the name to the Eagles very early on in my life, and have been the Eagles ever since. But talking about Eastern Michigan, one thing that sticks out is you have a guy named, you talked about Paul Jackson. Paul Jackson, he's their scorer, but he's not doing it from beyond the arc. In the first 2 games, he's only shooting 14% from 3. He is trying to get into the lane and trying to create baskets in the lane, in the paint. Boubacar Touré does the same thing. He's very big, 6'11". He's from Senegal, and really wants to dunk the ball. He wants to lay it in. He's averaging right now 71% field goal percentage, and that's because he's getting easy buckets. So what is the key to this game? Limit the easy buckets. I think we didn't do a good job of that against Army today, and I think that's something that we can easily see what we did poorly and really try to fix it for this game against Eastern Michigan, because they're not shooting a lot of threes, and they're not shooting them well so far early on the season. And like you said, Jason, this includes 2 games against NAIA opponents. So with Paul Jackson and with Boubacar Touré, they're going to be the main scorers, but obviously you have a couple of guys. James Thompson is going to be a guy who can get rebounds. Ty Gross is also a guy who can get rebounds. And Kevin McAdoo is a guy that he's only played 1 game. He's averaged 10 points in 21 minutes, but I think is a guy that's kind of like what will be viewed as their X factor this year, because he can shoot the 3 better than anybody else on their team. So and he shoots about 40%. So what does this all mean? If we can, limit it, turnovers limit their opportunities inside the paint, force them to kind of shoot outside jumpers, not open ones, but contested outside jumpers, that's going to give us a chance to really get out on the break, which is what I know a lot of our guys love to do. So, and then also on offense, if we can settle down and hit some shots, against Kentucky, we shot like 69% from the floor and like 47% from 3. We're not going to do that every game. But against Eastern Michigan, I think if we're going to get a lot of opportunities for open looks outside, if we can make them, then it's going to be hopefully an easy night for the Blue Devils.
Yeah, I think the offensive execution is the thing that I'm really looking for here. I want to see Duke move the ball a little better, and specifically, I want them to take better shots. We talked about in this Army game today how Reddish and Barrett were taking these mid-range jumpers that weren't really in the flow of the offense. A lot of times Duke was letting the clock wind down on the shot clock wind down and was being forced to take weird shots. I know that there was a moment, Donald, I don't think we mentioned it yet, where Marquise Bolden had the ball at the 3-point line with, as the shot clock was running out, and he took an unattractive, I would say, 3-point attempt. So Jason, I'm not sure how your prediction on Marquise Bolden's threes is coming along so far this year, but that being said, I would like to see Duke not have to take 25 seconds to set up a bad shot. I would like to see them take 15 seconds to set up a good shot. There are plenty of guys on this team who can make good shots from different spots on the floor. They shouldn't be relying on these mid to long range twos that that are not high percentage plays and don't flow well. The passing is good enough on this team between Trey Jones and Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett. These guys can pass. There's no reason why they should be taking bad shots. So I want to see the offensive execution be a little crisper. You don't even really need the ancillary guys, the O'Connells, Jack Whites. You don't even need them to really get involved in the scoring for the scoring to look a lot cleaner. Obviously, those guys can be open, can take the 3-pointers when they've got them, but I want to see the main offensive threats on this team really lock down and get good shots.
Guys, it is time for Player of the Week. I think that we're probably going to all say the same name, but I will go to Donald first. And by the way, this is not just the Army game. This is Kentucky and Army combined. Donald, who is your Player of the Week?
I feel bad saying that my Player of the Week is Zion Williamson because I think you kind of have to be human to qualify for this award, and I don't think he's human. I'm not convinced yet. But it's Zion Williamson.
If you told me he was an alien from another planet, I wouldn't be like, that's insane. I'd be like, yeah, I could definitely see that. Sam, who is your Player of the Week?
There are 5 statistics generally that we look at for finding double-doubles, right? It's points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. Zion Williamson does all of them. He fills up the stat sheet in the most impressive ways. Obviously, he scores. He gets into the lane. He knocked down a few threes against Kentucky. Obviously, he gets rebounds. He gets up high. He's a big guy. He can box out. But the blocks are the most impressive thing I think about Zion is the way that he gets up, even when it doesn't look like he has the space. He comes from out of nowhere to get the blocks, and he doesn't tip the ball. I mean, he smashes the ball. He smashes the ball out of bounds, which is not the best play. But the play that we talked about against Kentucky, where he went up, just took the ball right out of the sky, and then controlled it to change possession and create a fast break. That's what has been so amazing about him is the way that he gets up and attacks the shots. And so obviously it's my Player of the Week has got to be Zion Williamson.
Yeah, and I'm going to make it 3 for 3. There's absolutely no question about it. Zion Williamson hit 81.5% of his shots this week. 81.5% of his shots. He's not fair. Like, if I'm so happy he's on our team, because if he was on another team, I'd be watching him play and I would say, I want that guy on my team so badly. It's not just that he's a great player. It's that he's incredibly exciting to watch. He brings energy. We talked about the fact that he dives on the floor like a crazy man, gets after everything. I've been so impressed with his ability to rebound outside of his area. One of the things the NBA looks for, one of the most important attributes of a big man these days is not the ability to grab a rebound. It's to grab a rebound outside of your area. Any fool can grab a rebound that comes to him. And guys with big wingspans can grab rebounds that come to them, even if it's a little tiny bit outside of their reach. Zion Williamson grabbed rebounds that he's nowhere freaking near. There were a couple rebounds he had today where I was like, oh, I wonder who's going to get that. And then suddenly, Zion got it. And I was like, how did he do that? Because he was nowhere near the play. I mentioned he averaged 81.5% in his shots on his field goals this week. 27.5 points per game, 11.5 rebounds per game, 3.5 blocks per game. Dude was just inhuman. There's no other way around it. And probably the most exciting player I can recall in a Duke uniform. I mean, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic to say that. This is the most exciting player I've ever watched play basketball at Duke. Zion Williamson, Player of the Week. Gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up with parting shots. We've been talking for a while, and our parting shot, folks, we're all doing the same parting shot this week. We very briefly, Sam mentioned this briefly on the Kentucky podcast. The Duke Nation lost a dear, dear friend, one of the greatest fans that Duke has ever had. Al Featherston passed away this week, passed way, way, way too young, way, way, way too soon. Al had written extensively about Duke for the Duke Basketball Report, but not just for them. He had also written about Duke for the Durham Herald Sun. He was involved in covering Duke and covering the ACC for numerous outlets over many, 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 many years. This is a guy who knew Duke history as well as just about anyone out there. And if you're someone who goes to the Duke Basketball Report bulletin boards, you know the name Olympic Fan. One of the best posters, one of the most thoughtful posters on the Duke Basketball Report bulletin board was someone known as Olympic Fan. And now that Al has passed, we can let people know that Al Featherston, the brilliant sports writer, was Olympic Fan on the bulletin boards. He couldn't reveal his real name because he didn't want to be accused of impartiality when he covered sports for all kinds of different outlets, publications out there. But he loved Duke so much that he wanted to be a part of the forum, the online community, and we cherished so much of what he wrote, so much of what he gave to Duke. Al will be very, very sorely missed. Sam, go to you first. Any comments or thoughts on Duke losing, like I say, one of the greatest fans the school's ever had?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that the three of us value on this show and that we try to impart on all of our listeners is just like sheer Duke and ACC basketball knowledge. I really enjoy reading about old ACC players and rivalries and teams. I think that's really fun, and it gives us a lot of perspective on where all these programs have come from and what it means to be a fan of different schools. Obviously, I've only been really following Duke basketball in, say, this century, so I don't even remember guys like Christian Laettner, let alone guys like Mike Jaminski or going all the way back to the Vic Bubas era. So having guys like Al Featherston around on the DBR forum to set us all straight, to remind us about this player and that player and former coaches and famous ACC tournament games and all that stuff. I think that's really important. I think it's really fun. I think it makes you not a better fan, but maybe a more invested fan when you know all that rivalry detail. And I find myself constantly not because I want to prove to anybody that I'm better than them or that I know more than them, but I find myself educating other people about ACC history. And I think a lot of the knowledge that I have comes from guys like Al, who he wrote more articles that just dove deep on random ACC stories, I think, than anybody. And I love reading that stuff. I think it's so fascinating. I think it's fun. And we're really going to miss him. Someone said on the thread on the forums about him, the best thing is that we have most of what he ever wrote archived on the internet. We can always go back and read those stories about the early ACC days. And he was a real treasure trove for information. If he had lived another 50 years, he would have had even more stories to tell us. And I'm going to miss that. I appreciated reading him as a younger ACC fan. Getting immersed in the conference history was really special to me. So I'm going to miss his coverage. I don't think I ever actually met him in person, but I feel like we all knew Al Featherston if you were around the DBR or just reading about Duke on the internet anytime in the last 30 years.
Yeah, Sam, I totally agree 100% with everything you said. The one thing about Al that I always will take is that every time he posted something on DBR, and for those out there, some people probably were aware of his identity on the DBR and some people were not. I was one of those people that found out about his identity. Obviously kept it a secret because that's what his wishes were. And there's reasons behind that, obviously, but knowing that it was him and reading what he wrote on DBR and on other publications, I always learned something. And I'm with Sam in the fact that, I'm relatively new to the Duke basketball history. I didn't grow up a Duke fan. I became one, and really the knowledge that I have is just a general knowledge of college basketball. But when it's Duke centric and ACC centric, a lot of that knowledge came from just reading what he had to say. I think one of the thrills that I've had on this podcast was Sam and I getting fortunate enough to interview him for this podcast, episode 32. If you want to go back and listen to it, but you could tell that we could have sat there for days and talked to him about Duke basketball, the love that we all shared for this team and for this institution, and you could tell how much he loved Duke, even just how he talked about it, what he said, all the knowledge that he was in, the fact that he was willing to share all that knowledge, because some people have this knowledge and don't share it, and he was one of those guys who was very receptive to making sure everyone knew about the ins and outs of the school that we all love. And for that, I will deeply miss him. I think, Duke and really, college basketball as a whole lost a great mind in Al Featherston. And we lost on the DBR community, even though, as Sam said, we didn't, some of us didn't meet him in person. We all lost a friend in Al. And so he will definitely be missed.
Gentlemen, very, very well stated. And folks, that is where we're going to wrap things up here on the Duke Basketball Report podcast. A very successful week for the Blue Devils. Before we go, I do want to mention that if you are out there and you're listening to us on whatever platform it may be, and you have not reviewed or rated us, given us those 5-star reviews, please go ahead and do it. Go into your iTunes, just click on that little star icon right for the 5th star for 5-star reviews for the DBR podcast. It helps us out with search results. It helps us out with all kinds of different things. And we work really hard to provide you guys with good content. So please leave us a review, rate us a little bit. And if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, if you think we're totally full of it and don't know what we're talking about, drop us a line, write to us. You can write to us always at dbrpodcast@gmail.com, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. We'd love to answer your questions. And everyone who writes to us, at least one of the 3 of us writes back. Always. Usually all 3 of us write back. That tells you how much email we get. That's going to wrap it up, though, here on DBR Podcast. This is episode number 133. It's actually 134, but I'm not going to get into that whole rigmarole again. For Sam Klein in Durham, for Donald Wine, not in Durham, now in Washington, D.C., and me, Jason Evans, in Atlanta. Thanks for joining us. It is now time for the Duke band to play us home.